Good morning everyone. Today I will be introducing to all of you the neurofunctional theory. Please allow me to discuss it first. When we say neuro, this means nerve or nervous system, has something to do with the brain. And when we say functional, having or involving a unique activity, purpose or task, referring to how something works or functions, and refers to the unique purpose of the brain to work or function. Let's get to the neurofunctional theory. Neurofunctional theory, this theory considers the involvement of the right and left hemisphere of the brain to be firmly related to the comprehension and production of language. And neurofunctional theory states that second and foreign language learning is primarily a neural brain-based process. So let's remember that if we hear brain-based, this is a neurofunctional theory that says it is about our brain and considers the involvement of the right and left hemisphere of the brain to be firmly related to comprehension and production of language. And one of the best example of neurofunctional theory can be seen in the understanding of how language is processed in the brain. Research has shown that language processing involves multiple brain regions, such as the Broca's area and Wernicke's area, as well as other regions involved in the integration of language with other cognitive processes, such as memory and attention. So it focuses on the way our brain works and how we think. So I'll give you a little background in the neurofunctional theory. So neurofunctional theory is associated by Mr. John T. Lamandela. He is a professor and linguistic in the linguistics program at San Jose State University, California. Lamandela distinguished that there's have a two basic types of acquisition, the primary language acquisition and secondary acquisition. And primary language acquisition can be seen or known in child acquisition at the age of 2 to 5 years. And secondary acquisition is subdivided into a foreign language learning and second language acquisition. And Lamandela 1979, he defines a neurofunctional approach on language that aims to characterize the neurolinguistic information processing mechanism responsive for the production and use of language. So, may I call on Ms. Fabillar to further discuss the left and right hemisphere.
In neurofunctional theory, Lamandela mentioned the function of the left and right hemispheres of the brain and its relation to the language acquisition. In this theory, it states that acquisition of the second and foreign language is mainly the product of neural and brain-based processes. He also believes that the right and left hemispheres of the brain is firmly related to the comprehension and production of language. Both hemispheres of the brain both accounts for age differences, formulaic speech, fossilization, and pattern practice in the second language acquisition. Now, this would be just a bit of review about the brain lateralization, or the functions of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is responsible for the speech, comprehension, arithmetic, and writing, because this is the logical part of the brain and focuses more on the language skills. While the right hemisphere of the brain is responsible for creativity, spatial ability, artistry, and musical skills, because this focuses on visualization, holistic thinking, imagination, and creativity of a person. And under the left hemisphere of the brain, this is where the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area are located. The Broca's area is associated with the speech production and articulation. This is the area that is responsible why we are able to articulate ideas as well as use words accurately in written and spoken language. This area is primarily involved in comprehension and is associated with language processing. We also already have prior knowledge about the disorders in Broca's area and Wernicke's area. These are the Broca's aphasia and the Wernicke's aphasia that affects the person's ability to articulate and to comprehend words. The Broca's aphasia is a non-fluent aphasia which the output of spontaneous speech is markedly diminished and there is lost a normal grammatical structure. For example, if a person have this kind of disorder, he will have the difficulty on articulating words, specifically on some linking words, conjunctions such as and, or, and but, and use of prepositions are lost. According to Paul Broca, by the way, he's the person who discovered this area of the brain. He stated that people with this kind of disorder are often upset because they are not able to articulate the right words even though they can comprehend what others are telling them. They are having difficulties when responding and sometimes they usually stutter or yung nabubulol. In Wernicke's aphasia, this is quite different to Broca's aphasia. This disorder is a fluent aphasia and focused more on the impaired language comprehension. However, despite this comprehension, speech may have a normal rate, rhythm, and grammar. A person with this kind of disorder is able to articulate words correctly, but not able to comprehend if he or she is saying the right words as he or she responds. And that's all for the functions of the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Good day, everyone. A while ago, John Jay already introduced the two basic types of language acquisition, but let us get to know more about it. The two basic types of language acquisition are primary language acquisition and non-primary language acquisition, which is subdivided into two, namely foreign language learning and secondary language acquisition. Primary language acquisition is when the child's acquisition is one or more native languages, taking approximately at 2 to 5 years of age in the context of progressive maturation. So, what is progressive maturation? Well, it is when a child is proceeding step by step to maturity. This primary language acquisition become difficult to achieve outside of critical period. As we all know, critical period ends at 9 to 13 years of age. For instance, a 2-year-old a 2-year-old child has a Filipino mother and an American father. They are currently living here in the Philippines. The child may acquire both Filipino and English as his native languages because of the environment where he lives and also because of his parents. Let us now proceed to the non-primary language acquisition. It is an adult's acquisition of a normative language after the period of primary language acquisition. This acquisition is characterized by the progression of interlanguages, which means the process of developing the type of language or linguistic system that second and foreign language learning use. Non-primary language acquisition becomes more difficult to achieve outside the sensitive period. Let us proceed to the first subtype of non-primary language acquisition, which is the foreign language learning. Foreign language learning refers to a process when a learner learns a foreign language or a non-native language while being in one's own native context. For example, a student in Pakistan studies English language because it is taught in schools, in educational institutions, and in Pakistan, English is not their native language, so they learn English in their native context. Let us now proceed to the next type of non-primary language acquisition, and it is the second language acquisition. Second language acquisition involves a process when a learner or a person acquires a second language or a non-native language while being in the same non-native context. For instance, A person in India moves to America and starts studying there. That person will be acquiring and learning English in the context of a classroom where he or she will be attending the class, and at the same time he or she will have to interact in the society by using the language. Right there, that person will be acquiring the language subconsciously. Second language acquisition can take place in both contexts, in formal context of a classroom or in the natural surroundings of the non-native language. The process of SLA is not restricted to any age, or there is no age limit. For example, an adult moves abroad and starts living over there, so unconsciously that person acquires the language of that native context. There are hierarchies involved in language acquisition, and that topic will be discussed by Jannai.
To further differentiate first language acquisition, second language acquisition, and foreign language learning, let me now introduce you to other concepts that are significant when learning about neurofunctional theory. So, as the neural systems of infants mature, networks of knowledge develop. These networks are conceptualized by Mandela as vertical hierarchies of neurofunctional systems. The two major hierarchies involved in information processing are the communication hierarchy and the cognition hierarchy. Let us first discuss the communication hierarchy. According to Mandela, the immature neural systems which do the actual learning of primary language are components of the hierarchy of neurofunctional systems operating in the domain of communication. In our brain, we have this what we call limbic and neocortical systems which are involved with communication. Mandela believed that the process of learning primary language follows a predictable pattern of a species-wide developmental stages. Each one is described in terms of the genetically controlled maturity of a certain brain system at a specific level rather than the publicly visible behavioral phases of apparent speech output. This is to say that the child acquires a whole series of limbic and neocortically based communication capabilities because of maturation of the communication hierarchy and its interaction with environmental experience. This maturation also leads to the acquisition of the secondary language. Why secondary? Because the essential characteristics of the process of secondary language acquisition is mainly developed originally during the primary language acquisition process. This reminds me of high school days. I studied high school in Pili National. Their dialect there is more like Bicol Naga than Rinconada. As someone who grew up in Bula, I was used to speaking Rinconada, so there was the process of absorbing and adapting to this new environment. It was through communication that I learned that makanood is not to be able to watch, but to learn. And the term maluto is not really ulam but a rice. Despite all that, I remember not having much difficulty in acquiring the dialect even without formal instruction. And I realized that it's mostly because of having my primary language acquisition. So you see, primary and secondary language are like trailing vine interweaves as it grows upward and outward in all directions, continuously flourishing, forming a complex hierarchy of ever greater complexity. You could say that these two have much in common and are highly integrated. Anyway, all you need to remember here is that we are talking about communication as a way of acquiring primary and secondary language. There is a system in our brain that is operating in the domain of communication and has the ability to mature by means of our environmental experience and interaction. Another purpose served by systems within the communication hierarchy is the integration of the new individual into a network of social and cultural relationships. Going back to my experience in high school, because of finally learning their dialect, I was able to form a deeper connection with my classmates and eat maluto peacefully. Moving on, we have here the next hierarchy, the cognition hierarchy. Basically, when we say cognition, we are talking about the mental process. You can see here that it is present in foreign language learning. We do a lot of problem solving and critical thinking when learning a foreign language, don't we? It's very different in acquiring a primary language and secondary because there exists a translation buffer. Imagine learning a foreign language. If you're good at imagining, you could also imagine that there would be instances when you first translate the sentence in your head using your native language before actually saying it. It's like there is an invisible map between the native language and the interlanguage. I think that's where the cognition hierarchy lies. Compared to acquired knowledge, learned knowledge is retrieved more slowly, hence making use of our mental processes. So to put it simply, cognition hierarchy is involved in problems requiring operation of cognitive abilities. As you may have noticed, cognition and communication hierarchies are highly integrated, sharing subsystems and genetically determined developmental sequences. And I think it's also worth noting that these systems may be further subdivided into high and low level systems. That's why it's a hierarchy. It's a very elaborate topic, but I am hoping you get the main idea and the difference between the two hierarchies, as well as the difference in secondary language acquisition and foreign language learning. Just remember that secondary language acquisition is a result of exposure in a naturalistic setting, and both primary and secondary language acquisition are in the communication hierarchy. On the other hand, foreign language learning is more complex and needs formal instructions. It falls in the cognition hierarchy. So to help us understand the factors to consider in the second language acquisition of neurofunctional theory, allow me to pass the virtual stage to our next reporter.
Let's come now to the factors to consider in second language acquisition of neurofunctional theory. First factor to consider is the age differences. Some adolescents or adults who start to learn second language would fail to achieve language fluency, while children who were exposed to second language at their young age seem to be proficient like native speakers. It was because young learners have great potential to acquire second language rapidly and efficiently, whereas adults are at an inferior position in second language acquisition because of the age factor. It seems like people will be performing well in language learning if they start at their early age. Second factor to consider is the fossilization. Fossilization is the process in which incorrect language becomes a habit and cannot easily be corrected. Fossilization and second language acquisition, a person simply become unable to learn the new language beyond what they've already learned. They may be able to pick up some new vocabulary but will never be able to fully grasp the grammar, the syntax, and the colloquial use of the language. Next is the formal-like speech. Formal-like speech consists of expressions which are learned as unanalyzable wholes. These expressions can be idioms, proverbs, post-filters, counting, or swearing, which means a speaker may produce an utterance he learned knowing its function without knowing anything about its structure. For example, the idiomatic expression, "I'm in a cloud nine," which means you were happy. You know how and where to use that idiomatic expression, but you don't know where is the noun, verb, or pronoun in that sentence. The last one to consider is the pattern practice. In pattern practice, learners manipulate grammatical structure to aid in memorization and development of second language habits. That pattern is a pattern of repetition, in which the arrangement of identifiable, repeated, or corresponding elements is in a text. For example, in a conversation, someone asked, "Is John busy?" and you responded, "Yes, he is." Then again, someone asked, "Are you busy?" and you answered, "Yes, I am." As you can see, the respond is the response has patterns. The question can be easily answered by yes or he is or I am, but instead you repeated your answer. Yes, he is. Yes, I am. In addition, Lamandilla argues that formal-like speech and fossilization, among other aspects of second language acquisition, are processes that primarily occur in the brain as a natural function. That would be all for the factors to consider in second language acquisition of neurofunctional theory.
In neurofunctional theory, this states that the neural system-specific language are to some extent innate and genetically programmed. However, critics have disagreed and believe that the perspective of this theory is not exclusive for language learning, but an attempt to formulate more global theory for human capacity to learn.
In conclusion, the neurofunctional theory provides a more holistic approach to understanding SLA and FLA, incorporating both the cognitive and neurological aspect of language learning and acquisition. By examining the underlying neural mechanism involved in language processing and production, and researchers can deepen their understanding of the factors that contribute to successful language acquisition and develop effective language teaching methods and strategies. Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you have learned something from our discussion.